We always enjoy the SEC football conversation with Brent Beard. You can catch him on First Coast News and also College Sports Today. All right, Brent. Well, the big news of the past week is down there with Brian Kelly's bunch with Jaden Daniels coming in. The first thought that crossed my mind was that that's a tremendous acquisition. Number one, the former Arizona State quarterback, but that Miles Brennan is a guy that dipped his foot in the transfer portal. Max Johnson leaves. He decides to come back, meaning Brennan, threw 12 touchdowns in 3 games to get his career started a couple of years ago, has had some serious injuries since, but now he suddenly goes from the heavy favorite as the starter to, boy, I got to fight for my life and try to win this job. But Jaden Daniels, he went from a very comfortable starting position to got to battle for a job, so should be pretty intriguing.
Well, it should, and if you have a chance to play for LSU, I see why you would take advantage of it. Daniels, as you mentioned, is a real talent. Now, they've been up and down at Arizona State during the time that he was there, so that's going to be interesting. And it is a full quarterback room. Miles Brennan basically was talked into coming back after – and you still hear inklings, Mark, that if Brennan had been healthy throughout his career, that he would still be the guy, which is interesting. So how long is he going to be able to or want to hang around? You've also got redshirt freshman Garrett Nussmeier, who actually played a little bit last year, but people may remember. And there were times he was pretty good, and there were times where, frankly, he wasn't. And then you've got 5-star freshman Walker Howard, who Brian Kelly basically made up the Dirty Dancing video with him at some point. So frankly, they have got a fairly interesting quarterback room. But I think what needs to be said on quarterbacks and other positions now. Everyone is given the one free move, shall we say, where they can transfer without penalty and play immediately. But the thing we've got to remember is, as we talk about it's easy to say, okay, they've got a full quarterback room. That means by the end of spring practice, they're going to lose half those guys. Well, they may and they may not, because this is not just for LSU, but Mark, if you have used your one free transfer, if you transfer again, you've got to sit out a year. And I don't know how many guys would be willing to do that in this day and age, to where they want to play immediately. So, Auburn's got a really full room. Florida's got a full room. We know the Alabama's with the Bryce Youngs and teams like that. They know who they're going to have. But Mark, it's kind of extremes, is it not? We either know who the starter is, or we have no idea who the starter is for some of these teams.
Well, I've been pretty curious about this one-time transfer rule as well, because it's been in play for quite some time. But in regards to the enforcement of it, I certainly don't have an issue if a player has transferred once and then they have a legitimate hardship issue, and they could appeal to the NCAA. But otherwise, I think this is a tremendous deterrent for what we've experienced over the last year and a half with this transfer portal and guys flying all over the place constantly. But then I see a situation like Chase Bryce, the quarterback who went from Clemson to Duke to Appalachian State in consecutive seasons. And I'm throwing up my hands thinking, is this rule not being enforced? And I've seen a couple other incidents, not too many, but a few other incidents like that. So I don't know what the deal is necessarily.
Well, I don't either. And that may be a compliance issue and some things that we don't exactly know about, but when we just basically throw that out there for our viewers to let them know, is we just can't go from to 5 different schools in a few years without not having some kind of penalty for that. And then the other thing that goes along with that, Mark, is as far as the academic end of it, we won't belabor the point here, is there's the progress toward the goal of graduation. Or are you able to do that in the midst of these transfers? So I think that the point is there's just a lot to go on there. But this LSU situation is going to be fascinating, is it not, Mark, to really kind of see what kind of spring they have and how these guys are able to work together. And look, if you're Brian Kelly, whoever you are, man, in this day and age, think about A&M last year with Haynes King going down and Zach Calzada, and what a difference that may have been for their year if King is healthy throughout the whole time. Mark, like a lot of positions, these guys don't understand this, and they don't like it. But look, I don't think you can have too many quarterbacks, can you?
No, not in this day and age. You cannot. You cannot. And it has been basically follow the bouncing ball of quarterbacks in the SEC Western Division as one goes to Oregon, and then he gets a replacement from Texas A&M, and then that Texas A&M new quarterback just arrived from LSU. Okay. We got Brent Beard on the line, of course, from First Coast News and College Sports Today. Brent, give folks an idea of where they can find you.
Yeah, at Brent Beard, Beaird. We have all the vowels. I'm also a college football analyst for First Coast News, and also do a podcast with longtime friend and Alabama senior analyst Travis Ryer called Second Helpings. That's the name of a Leonard Skinner album that came from Travis and naming that one. But second is emboldened with SEC, as you can imagine. So we enjoy that. You can certainly find us, Google or YouTube or whatever your preference is. We enjoy doing that too, as we always enjoy being with you, Mark.
Brent, most of the teams across the country have just dipped into spring practice. Set us up in the SEC in regards to dates, so we've got a framework of what's upcoming here for SEC spring practice, spring games, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, let me give you the spring games, and people can kind of do the math to go backwards with that. Is Missouri has their spring game on March 19th, so that's around the corner. I guess Eli Drinkworth wanted to get it over early, didn't he, Mark? There's probably still some snow in Columbia with that. On April the 9th, Auburn, Kentucky, and Texas A&M. And then on April the 16th, which is Easter weekend, and the unfortunate thing about the way the calendar hit this year, I think most coaches like to not have a spring game on Easter weekend because, frankly, if you're visiting family and you've got church events, you can lose several thousand people on Easter weekend. But most of the games are on Easter weekend. Florida, Arkansas, Alabama, South Carolina, Georgia, Mississippi State, and Vanderbilt. And then you've got on April the 23rd, Ole Miss and LSU. And notice the name that we have not mentioned here is Tennessee. And the reason is Tennessee's not having a spring game. A lot of people may have missed that, but they've got some construction on the stadium, I understand, and other events that are conflicting. That's a disappointment, frankly, Mark, for the fan base, especially with the excitement that's going on in Tennessee right now, which is so you can reach out and touch it right at this point. Folks are so excited about that. And by the way, a wonderful Tennessee note, Mark and I share some notes together, and the points per game, Tennessee went from 108 to number 7. How about that for an improvement over the course of the year? And that's tremendous. So, but I always encourage fans to go to spring games if you can do it. Mark, if a guy's got, I don't know, 2 or 3 kids and they can't afford tickets during the year, would there be anything better than get the family together, walk around campus and go to a spring game for a little bit of nothing right now.
Absolutely. And it's great entertainment. And most of the schools will put together a weekend. You know,
Yes,
it will involve
right.
softball, baseball, and other sports as well, and other activities to make it a full weekend event for any families that want to partake. And that's a great point. In terms of the Tennessee situation, I believe, based on the information we got from our guy Charlie Burris, who talks Tennessee with us on a regular basis from A to Z Sports, that the Tennessee uh, game will be shown on some large screens across campus, but because of the construction within the stadium, they don't want fans in the stadium, but they're going to display it in whatever fashion around campus.
Yeah, well, that should be interesting. And I think, like you just said, they've got a big weekend plan too, with I think baseball and softball. So if you're a Vol fan, kind of keep in touch with how you can do that. But look, Mark, just to me, as long as you have a game, just do something. I think the fans really enjoy that, and they just want to see you throwing the ball around a little bit, see a few new faces. It's always worth having some concoction of a spring game if you can possibly do it.
Yeah, and again, I just as soon as you mentioned that and kind of paint that scene for us, I hearken back to my days covering Alabama, Ole Miss, and Mississippi State in person, and those big weekends with again the baseball team, the softball teams, and other things going on, and it was something that folks just loved.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely, no question about that. And we've got a lot of teams. And we mentioned Missouri's almost over. Well, Alabama begins this week. They have one practice, and then they are lectured by the coaching staff as they leave for spring break. Gee, Mark, it's hard to imagine what college students may get into in spring break, but they are. I'm sure they're probably read the riot act. Number one, about gaining too much weight, and number two, most of all, is boys, we need you to behave over the next few days before you come back, or there'll be some consequences when you come back on campus. So that conversation will be interesting to hear, I'm sure.
Yeah, spring practice this time of year, and then also the bowl season between the end of the regular season and the beginning or the national championship game. Those are those two periods where you really don't want to hear any news. Of course, we want to get indication of what's going on the field, but in terms of real hard news, because it typically involves an injury or somebody's getting themselves into trouble.
Yeah. Well, and listen, and to dovetail with that, another reason why spring is important, and I know some fans yawn at spring sometimes, but what's made it even more important now is the transfer portal, Mark, is huge. And my understanding is May 1, and you may know a different date on this. May 1 is the date that you can transfer up until that time for fall sports. So you're going to have some guys after they see the pecking order after spring and the spring game that they may be trying to go to greener pastures after that. So I think that, or can we say that makes spring maybe a little bit more important than it used to be, Mark, because of who may not be there after the spring game going into the month of May.
Well, to your point, last season we saw a mad rush to the transfer portal following spring football because players can see for themselves, how do I stack up? Which units am I being placed on? And of course, have that conversation with their head coach or their position coach to understand and have a real perspective on where they stand. And if they don't like it, boom, it's off to the transfer portal. And again, we should see a flood following spring football. Brent Beards here talking SEC football with us here on the Voice of College Football. You can catch Brent again on Second Helping, SEC Second Helping, and also First Coast News and College Sports Today. Yeah, the Alabama team in camp for the first day on Friday, and I just have to think that this group is armed and ready and motivated to make amends for what happened at the end of last season. A successful season by all accounts for every other program in the country except for them for the most part.
Well, and even with as many guys as they've got coming back, I mean, they've got like 9 of 11 starters coming back on defense. You've got the Heisman Trophy, Bryce Young, coming back on as far as the offense is concerned. But there's still going to be some very interesting battles, and we won't go into great detail with this. But watch the wide receiver battle. I think is going to be fascinating to say the least. Maybe with a healthy JoJo Earl. Jermaine Burton, the Georgia transfer coming over. I think it's going to be fascinating. Offensive tackle, where are they going to go as far as the offensive tackle is going to be concerned? Looking at some young guys, J.C. Latham, Tommy Brockenmeyer, just to name a few. I know that Damian George played a little bit last year. Inside linebacker with Christian Harris leaving. That's going to be interesting to see kind of where that goes. Also, cornerback, we know about Josh Jobe, Jalen Armour-Davis leaving for the NFL. Kool-Aid McKinstry would be back. He is going to be a mainstay and a real star. Kyrie Jackson, who saw time in the national championship game, Mark, probably before he needed to and wanted to, frankly, but he still got out there. And Teron Arnold is going to be very important. And running back, Brian Robinson is gone to the NFL, and he's going to make a team. He is, he's not flashy. He's not going to run a 4-2 or anything like that, but he is an all-purpose back in a lot of ways. Trey Sanders, Jahmyr Gibbs, the Georgia Tech transfer, among others, at running back. So the tide is loaded, Mark, but don't think for a minute there won't be a lot of position battles as they get on into the spring.
I'm fascinated by that wide receiver group, as you mentioned off the top, because it's been the best group in college football for the past 4 or 5 years. Jameson Williams, John Mechie were dynamite in replacing the legendary guys, the first-round picks that they had before. But, of course, Mechie gone for the playoffs. Williams gets hurt in the national championship game. And we saw a prime example of replacing 4 and 5 stars with 4 and 5 stars that don't have the experience and have yet to prove it. And Bryce Young threw some dimes that were dropped in that title game that could have proven a completely different ball game had they been held on to.
Oh, yeah, there's no doubt about that. And I mean, Trayshawn Holden and Jai Hall are guys that they've got immense talent to go along with Ja'Cory Brooks, who caught the late touchdown against Auburn. But that's going to be very important. And very quickly here, I think we all saw, didn't we, Mark, that video of Nick Saban talking to a group and mentioned to having receivers that were in the national championship game who had not really paid attention to detail, and they weren't as ready to play as they should have been. And that really cost them and the team an opportunity. So the question is, will they be heeding his advice come spring?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Brent Beard, First Coast News, College Sports Today, in his podcast, Second Helpings. Emphasize that SEC, of course, in your second helping. Brent, we always enjoy the conversation. Appreciate you stopping by.
Mark, always a pleasure. Look forward to being on with you next time. And we'll certainly talk about more teams that will be involved in spring practice by then, young man. So stay warm and dry out there. We'll talk soon.